the horror. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Urshan, and this week we are discussing David Gordon Green's Halloween Trilogy. Now that the trilogy has come and gone, and as far as the Halloween franchise goes, they're already moving on. They're talking about someone taking over the rights to the franchise. They're already talking about a TV series possibly coming up, and they're already talking about new movies coming back up. And also, David Gordon Green is moving on. He's moved on to the Exorcist franchise with Exorcist Believer that just came out. And there's a planned trilogy for that, although I don't know if that's going to happen, seeing as all the flack he's getting for this film and all the bad reviews. And so it's interesting to go back to what he did with the Halloween trilogy. And overall, I'd love to hear your thoughts, guys. Was it all worth it, or should they have just left the Halloween franchise alone? Or should they have given it to a more capable director? Was it all worth it in the end? So we'll go through each film and my thoughts. Also, this is probably the most divisive trilogy of a franchise that I can think of outside of Star Wars. So you could go back to Star Wars with the prequel trilogy, the 1, 2, 3 that George Lucas did, or same thing with the requel trilogy as well, very divisive with, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker. So I'd say it's a similar case here, where, every film is divisive, very divisive. Especially the last two. The first one in the trilogy was Halloween. First thing that I have a problem with about this film is the fact that it's just called Halloween. Given that the original film was called Halloween, the remake from 2007 was called Halloween, and then they just call this one Halloween. Come on. Couldn't come up with something? With that being said, this is the film that probably gets the most praise. It's the most loved out of the franchise, and it did get pretty good reviews when it came out from critics and fans alike. So this is the most loved of the three, I think, easily. And it was very successful at the box office, so it did bring the Halloween franchise back to prominence, and it brought back Michael Myers in a big way. And that's probably the best thing I can say about it, is that it brought Michael back, and they did a great job. Everything they did with Michael, not only in this film, but in the next film as well, is great. They brought Michael back in a great way. I love his look. I love the look of the mask. I love the portrayal by James Jude Courtney is fantastic. He took everything that Nick Castle did in the original and did Warlock in the second film, and of course he brought his own spin to it as well. But he's just outstanding as the Shape. And the overall look of this film too is just great. The production value, the direction of David Gordon Green, I'm going to give him all the praise in the world. I think he's such a stylish director. I love the visuals in this film. I love the lighting. And he did bring back some suspense and tension that the franchise had been missing for a long time, So I give him a lot of credit for that. And it's almost like Rob Zombie in a way. I have a lot of the same issues with, I think David Gordon Green is a great director as far as his visual style and the look of his films. But when it comes to the story, there's really not a whole lot there. And I think that's one of the major problems of this trilogy. I don't think that there was a clear plan for all three of these movies. It kind of seemed like they were just doing it as they went along, much like the recent Star Wars trilogy. It seemed like they didn't have a plan. They were just kind of making it up as they go. Maybe there was a plan, but it sure doesn't feel like it. It feels like they just were going along by the seat of their pants, But I love Jamie Lee Curtis' performance. She has one of the best performances of her career. But with that being said, I hate the fact that they retcon all the sequels, including Part 2, which is my favorite horror sequel of all time. And I don't think it was worth it, because I think that whole aspect of the franchise, the fact that they were brother and sister, would have played a bigger part in this movie and would have made it better. Personally, I think it would have made it more personal between Laurie and Michael. Not only that, is Laurie has a family now. She has a daughter and a granddaughter, and man, if you bring Michael back into their lives, terrorizing his sister, terrorizing his niece and granddaughter, that would have made things more intense. But no, I think the fact that it's 40 years later and she's still obsessed with what happened just from the events of the first film, it's a little extreme, the fact that she's this survivalist, hell-bent on safety and, setting up her house like a survivalist, preparing for the imminent return of Michael Myers, which is, of course, what happens in the film, because if that didn't happen, we wouldn't have a movie, right? But I think the fact that she's so obsessed with it and to the point where she's teaching her daughter how to shoot guns and be a marksman, she's got a whole array of weapons in her basement, and she's got this whole underground bunker going on in the house, It's kind of a bit extreme if you're only going by the events of the first film, which Michael just killed about 3 people. And there's even a little kind of knock on that when the kids are in the street. They're talking about, it's not really that big of a deal. People, a lot worse things have happened, when there's serial killers that have killed 50 people or 30 people, It's not that big deal if a guy just killed like 3 people. Especially 40 years later. So yeah, I feel like if they had kept at least Halloween 2 in there, that would have been more of a reason, the events that took place in there and the link of them being siblings. But anyway, they retcon the whole thing. But as it is, I think it's a solid film. I have a lot of issues with it, especially the humor. I think the humor is very forced and cringeworthy, especially the dialogue. I hate the scene with the 2 cops sitting in their car talking about sandwiches. It was just like, it's almost like you stopped the tension in the movie just to have this stupid comedy scene. And it just made no sense to me. So yeah, I definitely have a lot of issue with the humor in the film. I think some of the side characters, like the sheriff, is really annoying. I'm like, why didn't they just make Will Patton the sheriff? Because he's such a great actor, and he does such a good job in the deputy sheriff role. Why couldn't they just make him the sheriff? It would have been so much better. So decisions like that were kind of annoying, and you got these two people that are just like these podcasters, these true crime podcasters. You would think they could have came up with something better than that. But at any rate, I think overall it's a solid return to form for the franchise, although I have a lot of issues with it. But still, my favorite scene in the entire franchise is in this film, and that's the part where Michael Myers gets his mask back. It's something so simple, yet so very effective. It's the point after he breaks out and escapes, and the bus crashes, and, he's back out on the loose in Haddonfield, and he goes to the gas station and beats the dude up, gets his classic jumpsuit, and he terrorizes the girl in the bathroom, which is another great scene when he drops, he reaches over the stall and drops the dude's teeth in the ground. Very morbid, very scary. And then he goes to the car, opens the trunk, and slowly puts the mask back on, and it's like, yes, Michael Myers is back, yeah. And that's the feeling I get every time I see that scene. I'm like, yeah, just the way it's shot, so beautifully shot, the way the mask looks so creepy, and it's got that weathered look, but it looks awesome. I love that scene. It's just fantastic. Then we get to Halloween Kills, which is extremely divisive in the franchise. This film is probably more hated than it is loved, I would say. Because there is a lot of stupid stuff in here, don't get me wrong, but this is actually my favorite of the three. Mainly because this is straight up a Michael Myers movie, 100%. This is Michael's movie. This is the true revenge of Michael Myers. That name would have been perfect for this movie, because that's exactly what it is. Michael getting his revenge for getting burned in the fire in the house, where they left him to die. It turns out he survived, and he takes out the whole damn fire department. Oh, man. This thing has some brutal kills, some awesome practical effects. Michael's at his most vicious and brutal in this movie than he's ever been. And that includes the Rob Zombie movies. He's just vicious, he's more evil, he's more menacing than ever, more dangerous than ever, more superhuman than ever. And that's an aspect that they didn't quite have in the last film. And the last film was like, you weren't quite sure whether he was, whether they were trying to bring back the classic style supernatural Michael Myers, or they were kind of leaving an air of mystery about the character, where there's no mystery here. He's a straight up supernatural, unstoppable killer in this movie. It's like they went the full, almost like, Halloween 2, 4, and 5 Michael, where he's just straight up supernatural, unstoppable killing machine. And that's what I love about this movie. With that being said, there is a lot of stupidity, especially with some of the human characters in this movie. And they try and incorporate a little bit of commentary, too, about mob mentality, where all the town gets together to try and stop Michael Myers, and they try to come up with a plan, and they're basically like the old school Universal Monsters movies, where the townspeople gather together with their torches and their pitchforks. It's almost that ridiculous, maybe even more so. But that's kind of, there is some interesting ideas there, but I feel like the execution is terrible. But another great thing is when they do the 1978 flashbacks too. They go back to Halloween back in 1978 when Michael Myers first was unleashed. And I think they did an excellent job with that. They make it look exactly like 1978. They make Haddonfield look exactly as it did in the original film. Down to the sheriff's outfits. They got the old school cop cars and the old school jackets with the patches on them. They do such a great job with it, and a great job with Michael's look back in 1978. You see that old classic 1978 style mask, which was so cool to see again, and they did an excellent job on that. And they brought back Dr. Loomis, yes, even though it obviously Donald Pleasance passed away. They kind of got a look-alike to do his role there, but it was still really cool just to see Dr. Loomis back in the franchise. I thought that was so cool. And I thought it was cool that we actually get to see what happens when Michael Myers gets caught and arrested. That was really cool to see. That was a cool shot, too, and they did that. That kind of harkened back to the original film. Yeah, I love all that stuff, so yeah, it's kind of frustrating in a way, because every great thing they do in the film, there's something bad to go with it, But again, the direction of David Gordon Green is excellent. It's very stylish, very creative. I mean, you gotta love that scene when Michael first descends from the house when it's on fire. Just that shot looks amazing. You know, there's some great scenery in this movie, some great direction. But again, it all comes down to the storyline. Very not. It's just not there. You know, it's not much story there. And what they try to do, they have a few good ideas, but the execution is kind of poor. You know, I do like Judy Greer in this movie. I think she really stepped it up from the first film. I really like Karen in this movie, you know. As well as Allison, too. We get to see a little more of Allison, and she really kicks ass in this movie, too. She wants to get together with Tommy Doyle, who's played by Anthony Michael Hall. I like Anthony Michael Hall, too, in the role of Tommy. Maybe he's a little bit over the top at times, you know, the evil dies tonight. That's another cringeworthy thing. Some of the dialogue in this film is very cringeworthy. Like, obviously, the evil dies tonight. They say it like 100 times. Yeah, but overall, this is the most entertaining film. It's the most brutal. Yeah, Michael Myers in this film is just badass. So I think this is the most entertaining and the most fun entry in the series. And they do a lot of cool things. They get a lot of things right. They get a lot of things wrong, but they get a lot of things right, too. So, yeah, I think it's the most entertaining and fun movie in the franchise. Now, we get into what has to be the most divisive entry in the David Gordon Green trilogy, and maybe the most divisive Halloween movie ever. You know, this is probably even more divisive than Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. It's very, very controversial because of the fact that they do something very different in this movie. This is a very different kind of Halloween movie, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm not against doing something different in the franchise. Not at all. But I feel like this was not the right time to do it. Something this drastic where they focus on a new character that is introduced in this film. Never been in the entire franchise until this film. And that person is the star of the film. Corey's character is the focus of this film, you know. Not Michael Myers. Michael Myers is just in the background, you know, we see very little of him. And what we do see of him is kind of jarring, because we see a very weak and broken down and very vulnerable Michael Myers, which is very weird to see, and it's interesting, and it is different, but it's like strange to see that, you know, a weak, broken down Michael Myers, and it's weird to see that. It's just so weird, and it's jarring. But I do like some of the things they do with that. I do like the idea of doing something different like this. But I don't think the third and final entry of this trilogy and what they present as being the final film in the franchise was the place to do that. You know? Man. And even Jamie Lee Curtis takes a back seat. It doesn't focus a whole lot on Jamie Lee Curtis either. She definitely takes a backseat to the Corey character, Corey Cunningham, which is, I like his story. I like how they started off there, where he was the babysitter watching this kid, and this kid ends up dying in his care. You know, it's a horrific accident, but still he's kind of responsible for the kid dying at the beginning, and you also see that there is something wrong. They don't really delve into it much, but you see that there's something off about this guy. And that's another thing they could have explored further had they introduced the character back in 2018. If they had introduced Corey in 2018 and slowly kind of developed his story, then this could have been a really good movie, you know? But the fact that he's just introduced in this film kind of is very off, that they choose this film to do something completely different and not focus on wrapping up everything you did in the first two films. You know, it's just weird. You have a whole franchise to wrap up in this movie. And you don't do that. You focus on this random dude that you just introduced in this film. It's just so strange. I like some of what they do with it, and I like the idea behind it. And I think the actor does a good. And I think some of the stuff they do with Allison's character and her having this romance with this guy Corey, who's kind of like a lost child, is interesting too. And what they do with Allison is kind of strange too, as where she seemed like someone who's going to be a very strong character, especially in the second film. She was following in the footsteps basically of Laurie Strode. We think she's going to be the next Laurie Strode, but she just ends up being kind of this misguided kind of misfit that's hanging around this strange boy. It's interesting. Another thing I will say about this film is the fact that they focus so much on Corey's character and they're not focusing on what they sold us in the marketing, which was the final battle between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. That was so much of the focus of the entire ad campaign, and in the movie it's only about 5 minutes. It's like they just did not deliver on that premise. I feel like they just kind of threw it in there. They just kind of shoehorned it in there at the end. So overall, my thoughts on the Corey characters, I like the idea of it, but again, the execution, I feel like could have been handled better. Especially when he kind of goes on in his descent into madness, and his descent into the dark side was a little bit too quick, I feel like they could have explored that more. I did like the idea of him kind of like learning from Michael Myers, almost being like his sidekick and Michael kind of being his mentor and going together on this killing spree. I thought that was something interesting. I like that he had his own cool little clown mask thing. I thought that was cool. I just like the idea of that. I thought if they could have explored that more, that could have been really interesting. But there's really very little of it. They just kind of throw it in one scene, really. But yeah, I like that idea. And I love what they did at the very end, because the end delivers the goods. I feel like that's where they excelled in this movie. That's called Halloween Ends. And they have the balls. I have to give David Green credit for having the balls to end it, to live up to the name of the film, which is Halloween Ends. They had the balls to do it. And that's to destroy Michael Myers. And I think they did that perfectly. I don't think they did justice to the final battle between Laurie and Michael. I thought that could have been a little bit more, there could have been more to that, but I think the death of Michael Myers and the destruction of Michael Myers was handled beautifully. I really liked that, they brought all the townspeople together at the end to kind of carry him off and throw him in the incinerator. I thought it was kind of poetic, and it's like, this guy terrorized these people's lives for 40 freaking years, and now he's finally caught, and he's finally vulnerable, and he finally meets his demise, and that's the perfect way to do it. So that, I have to give David Gordon Green all the credit in the world for that. So he delivered on the premise, he delivered on the title, and he basically ended the franchise. And he didn't leave room for the Corey character either. He didn't leave any room for it to go on, except for maybe they could have did more with Jamie Lee Curtis's character, because she did survive. And Allison still survived. They could have left room for Corey to maybe return and take over the franchise, but they didn't do that. They killed him off right at the end. So Michael actually kills him. So it was kind of strange that they didn't leave anything on the table. They ended it with Michael Myers. So I really like that part of it, but there's a lot of things I didn't like about it. I thought it could have been handled better. But it's interesting. At the very least, I will say the film is interesting. Is it a great film? No. There's a lot of things I don't like. It's very divisive. As many things I like, there's just as many things as I don't like, so it's kind of it's a very frustrating watch, and that's something that's prevalent in all three movies, is there's a lot of things that frustrate me that I wish they could have handled better, because there's so many things they do right, and they brought the franchise back to prominence, big box office numbers, although I do think it was a mistake to do Halloween Kills and releasing it on streaming platform Peacock at the same time as it was released in theaters. I thought that was not a good choice, I think Halloween should always be a theatrical experience first and foremost. There's nothing like seeing a new Halloween movie on the big screen. And I think that they probably lost a lot of potential money. Even though it still was successful, I think they missed out on a lot of money if they released it in theaters, because by then I know the pandemic did affect a lot of things and did affect the theater experience a lot, but I feel like at that time, by the time they came out with Halloween Kills, it was kind of back on the rise again. They could have just solely released it into theaters, and it would give people more of a reason to go to the theaters, because you got this big Halloween movie coming out. I feel like they missed out on a lot of profit there. But it was certainly good for Peacock, but yeah, I think that was kind of a mistake there. But at the end of the day, folks, what are your thoughts? Do you think bringing back the Halloween franchise for this trilogy was worth it in the long run? Or do you think they should have left it alone? I give it a very reluctant yes, but yes, nonetheless, I feel like it was worth it in the end, because they did bring the Halloween franchise back to prominence, and Michael Myers back to prominence as being like the king of the slashers, basically. So in that respect, I do think it was worth it, because yes, they did very well. They were very successful in the box office. So from that aspect, it's great to see Michael back and bringing the franchise back into the spotlight, and despite all the things they did wrong, I think the things they did do right, they did very right, and you got to give them some respect for that. Again, David Gordon Green's direction is fantastic. I think story-wise is where they do not hit the mark as far as the story goes. Like I said, I don't think there was a clear plan going into this for all three movies. Maybe they planned out 2018, but they didn't know where they were going to go with it, I feel. Even if they say they did, I don't buy it. I feel like they just went along as they went, And that's my thoughts on the Halloween David Gordon Green trilogy. Again, it was worth it in the long run, but it's definitely a very divisive series that divides a lot of fans. But it is food for thought, It's something that you can talk about your horror friends with and, debate on things. And that kind of makes it interesting, too, when you can have this wild debate about all three films, because they're so divisive. So there's so many different opinions on these films, but it just makes for interesting discussion, doesn't it? And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Urshan, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared. Good evening, folks, and we got some brand new merchandise for you over at www.thehorrorkona.com, and that's CONA.com. Representing the Horror Corner. Great new design. We got the Morbid Hour live stream there, you got the Horror Hangout live stream there, and you got my nemesis, the Dark Fate. So grab your t-shirt over at www.thehorrorkona.com. And we also got this beautiful new mug. Look at that. Very, very cool. Thought that came out really nice. So grab your merchandise today over at www.thehorrorkona.com.